what we're looking at here is a operator view, operator screen, and we want to make sure at the operator level that there's only a few things that need to be concerned about. So the first thing we see is a big OEE symbol here with 121%. So at a glance, we already have some issues here where we can see operator is doing better than expected. So our target is, they're having a good day. But at the same time, we can see this timeline here. And we use a bit of a visual cue here to say, okay, if it's green, you're doing well, and you're making a lot of product underneath here. 3 parts every 5 minutes, a 4th part in here, and you're achieving the target. You're doing better than the target. So as a supervisor, you might look at that and say, hey, maybe our target's too low, or maybe there's something wrong. I better just double check that they're doing their job properly, right? But we do have this big block of red here. So the operator looks at it, they see it doing well, but I do have to account for some of these issues. So all they do is click on this and say, we have an issue. I know what it is. It was a material problem. Material handler wasn't there. So I'm done. And from a visual aspect, that red has disappeared and it's turned into a light blue block, which is an indicator for anyone walking by that we have a material handling problem. And this is one of the things that we do with ShopLogics is we color code things according to role and to the person responsible or accountable for that process. So if the material handler is looking at the screen, they'll see right away, I gotta, make sure that I get back to the cell on time. Simply put, we want the operator to not spend a lot of time in ShopLogics and just focus on doing the work. But if they don't do it, they don't account for anything, then we want that information won't be granular enough for us to act on when we look at that information at a higher level. So let's look at what maybe a supervisor might be looking at. So here's an example of a supervisor screen. I believe we call this this is the analysis view. So it has instead of just one machine or one operator, we have multiple machines on one view here. And immediately we can see if I was a supervisor, my eyes would be drawn to certain things. So this type of screen might be sitting in my office or just outside of a common area. So as I'm walking, I can glance at it and see, whoa, what's all this purple over here? What's going on? So they can see that the operators actually applied some reason out of racks, bins, dunnage. We all know what that looks like. They're like, okay, we want to work, but we don't have enough bins to put our parts in. So this is a common problem. If it's a one-off, he's going to call the material handler, he's going to call the warehouse coordinator or whatever and make sure that we get the bins that we need. But if this continuously happens, we need to put an action in place. So that's definitely going to draw the eye. And there's even a little button here. So if he wants to create an action, the supervisor can press this and just create an action. You can see that blue has turned to white. And we'll look at that in a few minutes, what the effect of that is. But what he's done is really recorded that for posterity so that he can move on to something else and remember that's added to a list so we can look at that later. Then he scans down and says, well, actually, this machine over here is only at 72%. So even though this was purple and drawing my eye, it's actually not running that badly. So it's good that we got an action in place, but I do need to do some investigation here. So I'm going to look closer at this. And basically, it gives him or her a way to focus their attention on what's required. At the same time, you could also say, well, we have a maintenance issue here, so I can create another action for that. Seems like this welder is always going down, so I want to take a look at that. At the end of the day, we'll have a record of everything that's happened and also a record of what they're going to do about it. So it's not just a matter of clicking on the software, clicking on the screen. There's going to be phone calls involved. There's going to be going over to maintenance to ask them what's happening. They've gone to the machine. They've seen the welder. They've seen the fact that there's no racks. They probably moved people from one machine to another. No one's standing around. But we want to make sure this all gets recorded so that we can have actions in place later. So in the morning, might come in and we want to see what happened while I was gone. So I'm the supervisor. I have this view. It defaults to a 24-hour review of my area. So if I click on the navigation window here, and my plant is the DA plant 1 plant, I can just click on this meeting view here, and that'll default to the last 24 hours. And that's the screen that I was just showing. And the best part about this view is it's just a summary. It's very high level. Again, we color code things. You can see this purple here, this fuchsia color. You can see that 74% right over here. We can sort this. So if you have only 5 machines, that's easy. But if you have 25 machines, we can sort it so only the worst ones are at the top. I'm just going to talk about the worst ones. I don't have time to look at all of them. So I want to focus just on what happened on that one. In order to do that, I can have a meeting with all my team. It could be a tier 2 meeting where I have a maintenance guy and I could say, okay, let's look at the top 3 every day before we go to the bigger production meeting. And the way I might do that is say, let's click on the station 3, and now we get this meeting view of just this machine. So we had the summary, and now we have the whole story of the last 24 hours. So we have this timeline here. We have our OEE. We have any of the Pareto of the downtime. We have the Pareto of the scrap. But we also have things like comments, parts that are getting damaged by the end of our tool. We have downtime that we can hover over. So if we're worried about this particular machine, we could see day shift was at 72%, and night shift was at 75%. So not bad compared to each other, but sometimes you might identify things that are better on one shift versus another shift. That's really the interaction that a supervisor or a leader or a manager might have on the shop floor using those meeting views. Very easy, very snappy, very quick to use. But when you get to that bigger meeting in the Obeya room or the huddle meeting around that board, it's best to bring up our analytics portal because you have a lot more flexibility in how you're going to present the data. And you also don't need to see all this granularity. You don't need to see this timeline with all these slivers of downtime. What you want to do is just focus on the key items of concern. So let's say we have a plant, has 3 areas: stamping, assembly, steel services. There's generally going to be a person responsible for that area. So in our meeting, they would say, okay, OEE for stamping is 61.3%. The assembly manager, he's got a great story. He doesn't have to say much. He's green, 97.3%. This person can just respond and say, hey, we got a few things we're working on, but overall, 97.3%, we're doing well. We don't have any major issues. We got some projects we're working on. We feel we can do better. Got a few things, but we're not going to talk about it. Steel manager is going to come up and have a different story. We just say, well, we had a really bad day. We had lots of things happening, still working through them. Got lots of idle time. We've got stacker problems. We've got coil change problems. These changeovers, yes, they're part of a process, but it shouldn't take 5 hours. It should take only half an hour, right? So now the focus of the meeting is around, the steel services area. So what we want to do is start simple with those few KPIs and not drill too deep into it until we're focused just on the one area of concern or the 2 areas of concern. Of course, this is a simple example. You might have 5, 6 different areas. This allows customization of these reports any way you want so that you can focus on the areas that are critical to your business. For example, the steel manager will have their own report. I click over here. We can see how that 29.9% was generated. In a simple way, yeah, we got availability problems. The machine was down a lot. But even when it was running, the performance wasn't great. It wasn't going at a big, very fast speed. So we got issues on both ends. So lots to work on here, which leads, to the next point in the meeting. We got to develop those actions. We got to really have those actions developed in advance of the meeting. So we bring up the action plan. And this is where the meeting basically moves from a reporting meeting to an action meeting, right? So these actions are already developed prior to the meeting, and we just need to follow up on them. So a manager will be looking at this and say, okay, well, did you do the thing? We have maintenance was required for mold adjustment. Was it really a maintenance problem? No, there's some training required. So is Mike Smith going to complete that training? Where's the corrective action? So we have different ways that we can track that based on the status. And these actions can be generated from the machine itself. As I mentioned, when I pressed on that button as a supervisor, it will generate an action to this list. Now, it didn't do it this way because I'm actually in a different demo environment for this particular action plan, just because it has a bit more granularity, some information on here that you can read compared to where that machine was located. But what it will do, it will generate an action that looks exactly like this. So a heat issue generated from the machine, the quality taking samples. This comes directly from this downtime reason at the machine. Now it comes up to the meeting. We can decide, okay, what was the cause? That should be already decided, should be determined. All we have to do is figure out what's the corrective action, what's the next step, and when is it going to be done by, and who's going to do it. So that really follows the flow within ShopLogics. If any of you are familiar with ShopLogics, you'll know we have many different screens, many different dashboards. In fact, when you get to the analytics portal, this is extremely customizable. You can make whatever you want, different widgets, different different ways to track the information. But for a daily management system, you really want to keep that information high level and focus on the actions that are driving those larger KPIs. So how do you get started with something like this? If you're a current customer, you might have tons of data. You don't know how to deal with it. If you're a new customer, you might have a DMS system already, but how do we get ShopLogics to be part of that? My advice is you start with the basics. You start with tracking that one KPI, that one metric. That'll start to drive change on the shop floor. So if you say the target is going to be 75% OEE, then start reviewing that each day and start to understand what that looks like on the shop floor. As you go through that process, you can add granularity to it. That's the next step. So what's the difference between a good day and a bad day, right? So when it is 65%, what's the difference between 65% and an 85% day? Is it downtime? Is it scrap? Is it performance? Is the machine running slower? All those things that contribute to that number, that's where you start to look at those things, start to track actions, and develop plans around that. And ultimately, that meeting at the end is an accountability meeting. So all this stuff is happening, these actions, these reactions, the escalations, it's all happening as part of the daily process, and it culminates in that 1 or 2 management meetings where we start to track those actions and make sure they're making an impact.